All right. Good evening, everybody. So it is March 24th, episode number 10 of Creation. And today is going to be more eye candy, more of an eye candy episode like last episode was. We've probably got maybe four more of these left, and I think we'll have covered it pretty good. Uh, Little refresher. So last week we talked about the physical changes that we could see to Earth, and kind of how there's a lot of proof that at some point on Earth there was a whole bunch of water moving and things got shifted around. And tonight I want to do the same kind of thing, but I want to do it with the animal world. So most people like animals, most people like dinosaurs and fossils and find stuff like that interesting. So I wanted to run you through that. And we're still in Genesis 7. Our scripture for the night is still 7:10 through 12. I'd feel horrible if I didn't at least read some scripture tonight. Uh, let's just review where we're at. So we're talking about the fact that, in the book of Genesis, it specifically states that the world was flooded all the way. And so in 7:10 it says, "It came about after 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights." So we have all the water exploding out of the earth, and then we have rain coming down for 40 days and 40 nights, making everything very, very wet. So there would have been a lot of flow of water, a lot of things moving, like we talked about last week, continents shifting, etc. Um, so in the animal world, there's a few key things that we can find, and one of them is fossils. And I find fossils fascinating. Uh, One of the most important facts to understand about fossils is how they're formed. And so there's only basically one way to form a fossil, and that is by a rapid burial of sediment. And what is sediment? So sediment is any kind of liquidy form of dirt, basically, right? It could be mud, it could be sand, it could be anything. And what it's got to do is it's got to bury either a currently living or very recently dead creature, rapidly bury them to protect them, encase them. And then what happens is that sediment kind of turns into like concrete, right? It turns into rocks. And so in sedimentary rock, what we find is we find all of these animals that are buried, and they're kind of preserved. The minerals work into the flesh and they replace parts of the bone, and the bone remains in some places. In some cases, flesh remains, but more than likely, it's just a pattern of the creature. And so it's not actual. You're not When you find a fossil, you're not finding bone necessarily. You're not finding skin or nails or anything like that. The rock has seeped in, the minerals have seeped in and replaced the bone, etc., with rock. And so what you're looking at is a rock representation of a now dead creature. So the rapid burial thing is really important. And the reason why it's important is because if we're talking about a flood that totally rearranged the earth, remember scripture said it destroyed the earth, right? Didn't annihilate it, but destroyed it. Kind of like my kids, destroy their bedroom. The bedroom still exists, but man, it does not look like it should. So this huge mass of water comes and basically just rearranges the entire earth. And so in that rearrangement, there's a lot of sediment moving. And so because there's a lot of sediment moving, we have a lot of creatures that get trapped in the sediment. There are creatures that did not get trapped in the sediment. Not every creature that died in the flood, including human beings, was buried. A lot of them would have just decomposed, floated away, rotted on a hillside after the water receded. Whatever, it would have been horrible. When the ark landed, it had been roughly a year, we'll say, just for ease sake. So most most animals that had not been buried right by rapid sediment would have decomposed and fallen apart. They're also, as we talked about earlier, it was only creatures of the land that were destroyed. So if there were sharks or crocodiles or whatever, you know, they may have turned to eating the dead animals that made it into the water. Um, the interesting thing about, I don't want to get into how scientists date stuff because unless you like math and you're a complete nerd like me, it's not very interesting. And unfortunately, there's no real like clean, easy way to explain it, or I haven't found a clean, easy way to explain it. There are so many holes in the way that we date things that it's almost not even a point to cover. And that's not me dodging an issue. That's me being honest, telling you that the way scientists date things today it's just not sound at all. And so you can't really form an argument either for or against it because it just there's so much bias in it and there's so many things that can go wrong. But we look at if I say to you the fossil record, what I'm talking about is in the sedimentary layers where all of these animals are buried, right? If we go on the evolutionary model, then there should be all sorts of creatures that don't exist anymore in the fossil record, because evolution teaches us that we're progressing and all of these animals are left behind. And so we have some big marker ones that we like to talk about, like the woolly mammoth. And we talked about that in the kinds episode, about how the genetics of the woolly mammoth are still there in the elephant. The saber-toothed tiger is just basically a lion with big teeth. But we have fossils of those, so we know they exist. In fact, we have frozen woolly mammoth bodies that have been kept in the ice, and they're actually trying to revive the woolly mammoth species, which I'm a big fan of. I think that's really cool. But out of all of the fossils that old, and there weren't very many mammals walking on the earth at that point, and there definitely weren't very many big mammals. How could there have been? Because the dinosaurs would have eaten them all, right? And so what science teaches us is that we had the dinosaur period, and then an asteroid came and totally annihilated the dinosaurs, and then the mice were able to thrive and they turned into different species. The interesting thing is that out of the mammal fossils that we find, 99% of them, okay, this is a PhD study from 1969, 99% of them are alive today, somewhere on the world. So we're not finding these weird creatures. We're finding creatures that we know. And, we can compare skeletal remains to the fossils. So other than the dinosaurs, there's no real huge amount of creatures that we're finding that don't exist today. I find that fascinating from a young Earth model, regardless of what people say about the age. So I like to keep things local for my United States people. In the United States, we find a lot of dinosaur fossils. Part of the reason is because there's a huge expanse in the West that has not been developed. And so everything's kind of been left in its state, which makes things a little bit easier, right? We haven't bulldozed everything. We haven't dug everything up. We haven't, poured concrete over everything out there. But there's this thing called the Morrison Formation. And what this is kind of like this sort of circular area out west where almost all of the dinosaur bones in North America are found. The interesting thing about the Morrison Formation, and it was named after the city that the first kind of pit of bones were found in, is the Morrison Formation is one of two kinds of places that we find fossils. And so there's I'm going to pronounce this wrong and I don't care, it's a lagertate, okay, which is basically like a group of bones that we find that are all jumbled together and all broken, right? So it kind of like bones were swept in a pile, and femurs were smashed, and arm bones were smashed, and skulls were crashed in, and we find them all in a big jumble. And then the other is what's called a conservation. And so conservation is where we find a mass quantity of animals that are intact in the same place. So Morrison Formation in the United States is where we find a majority of dinosaur fossils, and it's a conservation. Um, Most of them are conservation collections of fossils where we find actual intact animals. Now, the interesting thing is the Morrison Formation. If we look at it here, here comes first eye candy, right? So you see this picture of the western United States, I guess we'll call it, the desert area, kind of dry area, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico. All of these areas that you see shaded here are part of what we call the Morrison Formation. And what this interestingly shows you is if you look on the border of Utah and Arizona, where the very edge of the formation is, that is the edge of the mountains. And then everywhere inside of the Morrison Formation where we have dinosaur digs going on or we found dinosaur bones, they're all low places, they're all basins. There's a few outcrops that have fossils in them, but the majority of them are found in basins. So if you go back to the whole earth flooding and things washing around, wouldn't debris that was floating in the water, wouldn't it end up getting kind of washed down the drain into the low areas? So the Morrison Formation almost helps prove the flood idea because all of the bones that we're finding in these huge piles, either Lagertate or the conservation piles, they are all in low-lying areas, generally speaking. So kind of like they were washed there. So when we talk about quick, rapid burial, when you think of like, I'm sure you've seen movies of tsunamis and things like the one in Japan or the one I think it was the Philippines. It wasn't too long ago, where this like looks like a little 4 foot wall of water just kind of comes onto land and then everything just gets obliterated. The power of water is amazing. But it picks up all this stuff, and then so it'll pick up all this dirt and stuff and all this crud, and then as the water leaves, it just deposits it. And so what happens with fossils is they quickly get buried like that, kind of like a tsunami, and they get impacted in the mud, and then the mud dries and solidifies and hardens and gets pushed down by gravity and eventually turns into a kind of sedimentary rock where you can literally break the rock open and see all the little parts in it, right? It's made up of sediment. So this rapid burial thing is quite amazing. We find proof in the fossil world that sometimes these burials were extremely rapid. So, we have a fossil of a fish eating a fish. That means the fish was mid-snack before, the flood dropped sediment on them. We have dinosaurs fighting. Literally, two dinosaurs were mid-fight. I don't know, if one was trying to eat the other or if they were arguing about, who got the next strawberry or whatever. But they were literally fossilized while they were in the middle of a fight. And then we have actually more than one where we have dinosaurs that appear to be, let me rephrase that, fossils that appear to be fighting, that were, buried. And so, this idea of rapid burial, you've got to understand how rapid it is. And I want you to think about, things that in your world, when a deer gets hit by a car and it's left on the side of the road, if you drive by right away, you look and you're like, somebody should get that deer. You could put that in the freezer if it wasn't too damaged or whatever. And then, a day later you go by and it's starting to blow up and get big and gross. And then 2 days later, there's vultures crawling in and out of it. And, dogs are running off with parts of it and all sorts of nastiness is going on. So when we find these fossils, they have been buried very, very quickly because God has designed the system to clean itself. So, we have buzzards, we have ants, we have, coyotes, we have blowflies, maggots, whatever. Everything gets in and gets the bones cleaned up, and then the bones disintegrate in the sunshine or in the soft soil. Uh, so for there to be, you know, any bodies that we find of any kind, they had to have been buried quick and then preserved. So like you can't, if you go in the woods and you bury a body and you go back to dig it up, it's not gonna be there for very long. You bury your pet hamster Fifi and come back in 10 years and try to dig it up, you're probably not gonna find anything of Fifi. Uh, and it, when you look at the number of animals that we have found in the fossil record, it lends credibility to this idea that everything was kind of all of a sudden buried at once. Yeah, I showed you these already. So then, uh, when we talk about fossils and we talk about rapid burial, like we look at this one of these dinosaurs fighting. Scientists will tell you that that's 250 million years old. Fossils take forever to form. It takes forever for the process to happen where the minerals replace the bones and then they harden into a rock that you can then pull out of the sedimentary layer. The problem with that is that we find, hang on, I'm missing pictures here. I'm going to give everything away. Here we go. So we find man-made objects that have been fossilized. And this was a mining hat that was left down in a mine, and it was buried in sediment, and it literally turned into stone. It was a leather hat that turned into stone. And then we also have this wheel over here, or what looks like a wheel, is actually just a roll of fence wire from the 50s that was left in a creek. And it was fossilized. It was rapidly buried. Maybe the creek flooded or whatever happened. And the process took place where the minerals replaced what the item was made of. So being that we have both of these artifacts, one is from the 50s and one I think is from the late 1800s, neither one of them are millions of years old. They're both man-made. So, we don't have to force our minds to think that just because we find a fossil means it's millions and millions of years old. We have proof that it doesn't take millions of years. And then the last thing I want to talk about the fossil record before we get into some other stuff is there should be in between species, right? So if a cow went into the ocean and became a whale and then came back out and turned into a human being or whatever they say happened, I think I got that backwards. I think whales came out of the ocean and turned into cows. But anyway, there have to be species that are in between, right? If my chickens are dinosaurs, then there has to be a dinosaur with feathers, or there has to be a chicken with scales that we find in the fossil record. And so, scientists have been digging and digging and digging, and they found this fossil called an Archaeopteryx. And there was a big to-do about it. It was the first dinosaur bird, so a dinosaur with bird feathers that they found. And this is an artist rendering of it. Remember, they didn't find it looking like this. They found a bunch of bones. And as is so often with our mentality when it comes to things from the past, we rely on artist renditions for what they think it should look like, not truthful renditions because we don't have any. Dinosaurs could have all been the same color. They could all have been purple with white polka dots. We have no idea. And so, the only things we can do is look at the natural world and see what is there now to see if things make sense, right? A horse and a zebra, they look a little bit different because one has black and white stripes, but, and one is usually solid colored. But they're not that far apart, right? It wouldn't be a reach to find, the difference between a zebra and a horse and say, okay, we can deal with that. So these artist renditions, they often ruin our own train of thought because they train us to think that this is actually how things are. So this is the actual skeleton on the left of the Archaeopteryx. And it's here with its feathers, and it looks all, weird looking. And the feathers were actually fossilized, which is kind of cool. So you actually had like a feather pattern, and you knew it had wings and it had a big tail. And its neck was bent because it was all kind of crumpled over. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the skeleton on the left in 2A, that's the Archaeopteryx, and then you look at the skeleton on the right, which is 2B, they look extremely similar. In fact, they're so close to each other that if you actually put them side by side, you would have an extremely hard time of telling the difference between the two. And the interesting thing is 2A is the Archaeopteryx. It's supposed to be the dinosaur in between a chicken and a dinosaur, a dinosaur with feathers. And the one on the right is an ostrich. So, that just goes to show this artist rendition stuff that takes place, and the way that we are trained to think. I would tend to suggest that the Archaeopteryx is probably some kind of ostrich or emu, some variant, some strain that some kind that is no longer around. Those skeletons are unbelievably similar in structure in all parts, even down to what we call the fingers. So, take when you see pictures of dinosaurs, when you see pictures of recreations of fossils that have flesh put on them and colors put to them and stuff, take it with a grain of salt, because it's usually not the case. Then on the last bit of the age spectrum that I want to hit on, where fossils maybe aren't as old as we think they are. This is a fossil that was found in Alaska. And there's a couple of these. I think they found 3 of them so far. And the tissue inside is still soft. And it's not that, it's not that it's necessarily like muscle or tendons, or there's markers. They didn't find any blood cells, but there's markers of there being blood cells there. All of these things. And this was from a T-Rex skeleton, I believe. And if, a T-Rex skeleton is, 350 million years old, even if it's 150 million years old, how the heck is there any soft tissue of any kind, of any form, left in something that old? It just screams impossible. And so that lends us to this idea that, maybe dinosaurs aren't as old as we think they are, that the fossils aren't as old as we think they are. And we get into this thing where all we have is the fossil record. And we can't Jurassic Park it, right? We can't recreate these things. I mean, they're trying to do the woolly mammoth, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's cool. Maybe somebody can do the dodo bird and get some of these creatures back that have gone extinct, if God is willing. But all we have is the fossil record. And so if we stop and we detach ourselves from these artistic renditions, and we detach ourselves from all of the things we know, and we take like a 5-year-old approach and start looking at the fossil record through the eyes of a child that hasn't been trained to think one way, or hasn't been trained to, specifically agree with one story or another, you start paying attention, you start seeing stuff. So here we have this is a dinosaur footprint. Not very interesting. I don't remember what kind of dinosaur it is. It doesn't really matter. But it's a dinosaur footprint. And we find fossilized dinosaur footprints all over the place. Now, the interesting part of this is that obviously the footprints happened because they were walking in something that was wet, which was then rapidly buried by sediment, which was then left behind, right? So they're walking in wet sediment that gets buried by additional wet sediment, or gets buried by water and is left there and hardens. So, you speak of worldwide flood, and if every dinosaur print that we find is because they stepped in some wet mud, then again that leads credence to this idea that maybe the world was flooded. Well, if we stop and we look at all the dinosaur prints we find something absolutely fascinating, or at least I think it's fascinating. I don't know if you've ever like followed your dog outside, or you know followed tracks. Like when I go walking in the morning, I'll often see deer tracks, right? And if the deer are eating acorns or something, they'll be like, circles upon circles, and they'll be walking around eating choice acorns until they're all gone, and then eating the acorns that they don't necessarily like until they're all gone, and then eating the last acorns, and there'll be footprint over top of footprint, and they'll be all over the place in little circles and stuff, right? And the same with your dog. If you watch your dog, when they go outside and they're sniffing around and having a good time, they're walking around all over the place. All of the dinosaur prints that we find are all in a straight line. And to compare it to like when I go walking in the morning and I see deer tracks, uh, the deer tracks that I find in a straight line are usually when they're crossing the road, because they're in a hurry because they're going somewhere. Either something scared them, or the sun's coming up and they want to get under cover, whatever. Well, all the dino prints that we find, they're all in straight lines. Like the dinosaurs were either moving from something, right? So moving from something that was bothering them, or they were running. So they were literally scared. And when I say straight line, I mean a straight line. So, here's a set of dinosaur prints right here. They're in a straight line. That dinosaur is going somewhere. There's actually 3 sets of prints on this, and they're all running, every single one of them. And then if we light up another one, here's a whole string of tracks, all going in a straight line, right? Another one, another one, another one. Now, the interesting thing about these last 2 that I showed you here on the bottom of the screen, let me clean these up real quick, is these 2 here, they're on the side of a mountain or side of a hill or a cliff, or however you want to term it. I don't want to use the word mountain loosely. They're on the side of a cliff, vertical. So not only did the dinosaur walk across and then the sediment get stuck the way it was, but then the earth was so rearranged that, they're now vertical. They're not flat. And I doubt there's any dinosaur that could have ran vertical across a wall. We got more. I mean, there are literally everywhere that there are dinosaur prints. Everywhere there are dinosaur prints. They're always in a straight line. And so, you think about that and you're like, well, okay, that's pretty intense. So that means that any time that we have proof of a dinosaur walking across something moist, they're going somewhere. Either they're running from something or running away from something. And I just find that really interesting. If we go back to that first picture, I think it's picture number 10 here. Yeah. So this is dinosaur print. This is found in Turkmenistan. If you look at that picture, it just looks weird, right? So what I've done is I've highlighted the dinosaur print in this picture. Or, excuse me, I didn't do it. It's been highlighted, right? So you see that, kind of claw-looking shape. It's 3 triangles, sort of, whatever, a round back, or round bottom to it. That's a dinosaur print. And so then if we look at this one, this is the same footprint, but interestingly enough, there's a human footprint inside of the dinosaur footprint. Now, I am not saying that when the flood came, the dinosaurs and the humans all ran in the same direction. I'm also not saying that the dinosaur was being hunted by the human, or, yeah, it has to be that way around because the human steps in the dinosaur's footprint. So I'm not saying that the dinosaur was being hunted by the human or chased by the human. What I'm telling you is that there was a human being and a dinosaur of some kind alive at the same time on Earth. This is not absolute proof. This is conjecture. Could that dinosaur footprint have been softened back up by some way, shape, or form, and then a human being walk in it? Yes. Could that actually not be a human being's footprint? Yes. Could it actually not be a dinosaur footprint? Sure. Um, are there markers in the human footprint that make it look like it has toes and maybe even some ridges on the toes, and we have a heel and we have a properly formed foot and it matches what we know as a modern day foot? Yes. Does the dinosaur print match a known dinosaur from the fossil record? Yes. Are both of them, according to scientists, both of those been formed at the same time? They say yes. So therefore, we have a footprint of a dinosaur and a footprint of a human being made at the same time in the same wet soil. So maybe we don't have this right. Maybe the dinosaurs aren't millions of years old. Or maybe human beings aren't as new as we thought. Right? Being a young Earth creationist, I believe it's the dinosaurs aren't that old. But I'm willing to look at any side. But this isn't the only proof that we have. And so the reason why this becomes important as we look at, we look at things like rapid burial and what it takes to make a fossil. We're starting to learn that all of a sudden that things have to be covered by a liquidy form of mud to be buried, because if they're not, scavengers or decay are going to get them. Then we find out that, sure, things have to be, covered quickly, but it takes millions of years to form a fossil. Well, no, it doesn't, because we have man-made artifacts from the 18 and 1900s that have been fossilized. All of a sudden, things start to get a little bit confusing, and then you see all these dinosaur footprints, and all of them are always going somewhere. Like something bad was happening, and they were hightailing out of wherever they are. And then we look at things of the evidence of in-between species, because, we have these millions and millions and millions of years between where human beings were and where dinosaurs were. And one of the examples that they have as one of these middle-of-the-road species turns out to look exactly like a species that we know exists today. And then we think about every single fossil that we dig up that's a mammal fossil, 99% of them, which is almost every single one, still exists on Earth today, meaning has not evolutionarily changed in any way, shape, or form. We start to have some problems. And it kind of makes it open up your eyes and say, well, maybe we don't know everything. Maybe the Bible is right. Maybe we've got this wrong. And, one of the things that I find so interesting, scientists are supposed to look at things completely objectively, but they don't. What they do, unfortunately, and I mean, we all do it in our own lives, so I can't criticize them, but what they do is they study off of the back of the person that studied before them, right? So somebody makes a discovery, somebody studies that discovery and further enhances it or adds to it. Nobody goes back at some of these initial discoveries and says, but what if you were wrong, right? And so, we start to look at these things, and for me, I start to say, well, I mean, geez, what if you're wrong? And so then we have other things that, they kind of lend credence to this idea that we have this time span thing wrong, right? And if we have the time span thing wrong, then it kind of blows the whole thing out of the water of this being millions of years old. And if the only way we have a fossil record is with a giant worldwide flood where everything is buried kind of all at once, and they're not as old as they think they are, then all of a sudden the flood that is in the book of Genesis starts to be the winning theory. I'll show you the footprint already. Then we have these. Now, I used to talk about Inca stones, and Inca stones are these little round stones that have dinosaurs on them, and I find them fascinating, and it turns out they were fraudulent. So I no longer include them in presentation because that would be dishonest. Am I disappointed they're fraudulent? No, not really, because there's plenty of evidence out there. Do I still think they're cool? Yeah, they're great artistic work, right? So, but some things we kind of can't refute, and one of them is cave art. So everybody loves cave art. Uh, I got a piece of cave art up here. That's cave art of what I would call a brachiosaurus, or when I went to school, it was called a brontosaurus, or whatever. We'll just call it a big dinosaur that eats leaves. That has a huge tail and can drink up a river, kind of like the description out of the Book of Job. Um, but we have cave art where we have, like, antelopes and gazelles and elephants and horses and people and all sorts of stuff, and sure enough we have cave art that depicts dinosaurs in the form that we presently know them as, which, if you're talking about cave art from what we think, is thousands of years ago, what scientists say would be, maybe 30,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, uh, they didn't dig up fossils and do artistic rendering of them. And so the ideas of a human being imagining a being that they've never seen all of a sudden becomes kind of impossible. And so all over the world where there's cave art, we find cave art of dinosaurs. And this is a great example. I love this one. And then one that I find is fascinating, that I actually prefer to show, but unfortunately it's really hard to see, is this one. So, and I don't have a pointer in the software that I'm using, so this could be kind of tricky. But if you stare at this picture long enough and you go to the, let's say, left top quarter, and you move down to, there's a white spot there. And if you stare at that white spot long enough, like a cream colored spot, all of a sudden you'll see a man standing there. You'll see his head and his shoulders and his arms and his legs. And then if you stare just below him to the right long enough, you will see a dinosaur appear. And it's very hard to see it in this picture. It's actually very hard to see on the drawing where this was taken from, because it's very light and faded. But here it is blown up. The man is not in here, just the dinosaur is. So at the bottom of your screen, from right to left, you have the head of the dinosaur, the long neck, the body, and the tail. And the tail has, I don't know, it looks like it has wings and it's breathing fire. Who knows, right? Dragons have to come from somewhere. So this is just another example of cave art. This is the whole picture. I'm going to give it to you again one more time. There's other drawings on here. It's not like, oh, just these two exist. There's a whole bunch of drawings on this wall art here, but here it is again up close. So very sort of bottom third of your screen, all the way from the right to the left, you will see the shape of a brachiosaurus or brontosaurus or whatever. And then we have crazy stuff like this. The dragon. It could have been some kids that went out and carved that, in the 1800s. I don't know. Supposedly that's legit. I don't know if it is or not. I just think it's funny. Do I think dragons exist? The answer to that is yes, and that is probably coming in the next episode. Don't still exist. Did exist at one point. But there's cave art of a dragon. So if you're one of these people that believes in unicorns and dragons, hang on to your hat, because we might find one day. So, I want to end tonight with my absolute favorite piece of creation history. And this actually changed my life. And I very intently am in love with it. And so when I share it with you, I hope you understand that this is coming from a place where this blew my mind, like rearranged my entire life, basically. Already had a relationship with God, came across this, and immediately repented of my disbelief. And I wanted to close with this tonight and just wrap all this up in a bundle. My point of these episodes before I show this, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. I'm not trying to make you believe one way or the other. What I'm trying to do is show you why I believe the way I do. You know, when I go to heaven, I stand before God. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. I believe the Bible. I believe every word in it. I believe God can handle man mucking around with it. Um, I believe that the earth is less than 10,000 years old from the point of creation. I believe that we were created individually by God on purpose. I believe that He created all of the animals as they are, and that, a lizard with blue stripes is no different than a lizard with red stripes, because the two could mate and then have baby lizards with purple stripes, and that's not a different species. It's just a lizard with cool hair, right? However you want to term it. But I'm not trying to tell you to believe one way or the other. I'm trying to get you to think. I'm trying to get you to get out of your box. I'm trying to get you to read your Bible. I'm trying to get you to stop taking what everybody gives you, and because they come at you like they're smarter than you, or they have a PhD in this, or a doctorate in this, or they're a scientist, or they're this, or they're that. None of that matters. Okay, you do your research, you do your searching, you do your reading, and you come to your conclusion. But I am telling you the Bible is correct. So with that, I have shown you tonight proof from the physical world, right? Not the earth, not mountains and rivers and stuff, but proof from animal world, the physical world, that there's probably a good chance that it was a flood. I've given you evidence of rapid burial. I've given you evidence that fossils aren't that old. I've given you some kind of evidence that all the dinosaurs were in a hurry to go somewhere, sort of. I've talked about the fact that almost all the fossils we find in the mammal world still exist today and are on Earth. I've neglected to tell you that we find dinosaur fossils on every single continent, including Antarctica, how they get there. I've showed you what scientists will term as a missing link, and it turns out it's the same animal that we have now, or sure looks like it. So now I'm going to show you what I believe is absolute proof that man and dinosaurs existed at the same time. And this honestly did change my life. So this is the Nile mosaic of Palestrina. It was found on a floor in Italy in a, I don't know, the term would be a castle. It's not a church, whatever. It was dug out of the floor in the 1600s, and it wasn't taken care of well. And it was given to a museum, and the museum restored it. And when they restored it, this is what we have. And this thing's big. And what it is it's a map. It is a recording of a trip down the Nile. So this dude named Demetrius the topographer was hired by a king to make a map of the Nile River. And so what he did was he traveled the Nile River and he recorded scenes that he saw while traveling down the Nile. And then he turned it into what is this big piece of artwork. Now, he may have done a drawing and it was turned into the tile mosaic. He may have done the tile mosaic. I don't know. It doesn't matter. What's important is if a topographer is hired to do topography, which is to make a map, they don't mess around. Because if they were to mess around, they could easily have their head chopped off or be shamed. Right? If you think about back in the day, if somebody came to the Americas and were asked to make a map of the coast, they wouldn't just make it up, or they would get in trouble, right? There would be consequences. There would be embarrassment. There would be frustration. There would be anger. There could be death. Right? If a sailing vessel is sailing and they're supposed to go into an alcove along the coast, and the alcove isn't there, and the sailing vessel runs into a cliff wall, and a bunch of people on a wooden ship die because the topographer lied, then the topographer would be, hung to death, ran out of town, whatever. The other thing to take into consideration is when a tile mosaic is made, even if it's made from a piece of artwork, meaning that the topographer didn't make the tile mosaic, but he made the artwork that the tile mosaic was made from. If he took the time to paint this or draw it, they didn't have paper like we do now. You couldn't just run down to the Dollar General and pick up a sweet stack of paper and just doodle on it and throw it away when you're done, and pick up a 24-pack of colored pencils and a pencil sharpener. We didn't have those things back then. Paper was extremely precious. Ink was unbelievably precious. It was hard to make. If you drew something and made a mistake, you had to crumple it up and throw it away. That's how precious paper was. So if you were to be a topographer and your job was to make a map of your trip down the Nile, you would be extremely careful. And so as you look at this picture, you see, some detail, some cool stuff, whatever. You see some people in there. There's a lion. Looks like some kind of antelope or horse or something. And then all of a sudden, if you start really paying attention to the picture, you see something that nobody has ever told you about before. And that is this. I'm going to use a term that's probably going to be found unfavorable, but being that this was on the Nile, there are a bunch of tribal Africans with their leather shields that we know that they had, and some spears maybe of some kind, or maybe bows, I don't know, javelins, something. They are attacking a dinosaur. And the words that are accompanied with the dinosaur, you see the words up there, basically translates to crocodile of death, which we're taught today that the crocodiles are basically surviving dinosaurs. They're the dinosaurs that survived, right? Their species hasn't changed, whatever. They've been around forever. But if you look at this, this is not a crocodile. This is not what we know as a crocodile. This is a man-eating lizard that they are trying to kill. So I want to go back big frame again. And then small frame. There is no way that this dinosaur would have appeared in this mosaic if it didn't exist when Demetrius the topographer went down the Nile. That's all I got for you tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I've got more coming next week. More pictures. I like pictures. I like sharing pictures with you. Hopefully these are getting you to think. Again, it's a pleasure for me to do this. Episode 11 will be coming out in 2 weeks. I told you I was doing 2-week stints so I can get all this together and make sure I get everything right. And leave me some feedback. Leave a comment. Smash the thumbs up thingy. Doohicker. Give it a like. Whatever. Share it. The episodes that you enjoy, share them. They are getting shared. We're getting views on them. Hopefully you find it interesting. If you got a question and you're watching on a computer and not on TV or whatever, you can leave a question in the comments. I will answer it the next episode that we do. I guarantee you that. So look forward to going over some more stuff in 2 weeks. And we'll eventually move on out of Genesis 7, but I really want to hit this hard and make sure that we cover everything. Then we're going to get into some other stuff, such as the Tower of Babel, etc. But I look forward to it. Thanks for joining me tonight. It's a pleasure as always. Remember, I love you. Jesus loves you way more. And if you're in the area, come to the Rock. TRWC, 10:45 Sunday morning. If not, join us on YouTube. Y'all have a great rest of the week.